Hello and welcome to Apple with the Doc. If you're a newcomer here, let me explain what this podcast is. Every podcast I go over new topics, new discoveries that are going on, and I explain them in further detail. And hopefully I can teach you a little something about health so you can better prepare yourself when you see the doctor and make educated decisions about your healthcare. So let's just jump into it. First bit of news that we have, lead could be fueling Americans' high blood pressure epidemic. This is from the NBC, from their health news. Lead, the toxic element that has started controversy, I believe in the late 2014 with Flint, Michigan, with lead in the water. Lead has always caused a problem in health. One of the things is children who are affected with lead poisoning can exhibit certain symptoms. One of them, more worryingly, could be neurobehavioral defects. So what happens is children who are poisoned with lead, their brains have a hard time developing, and this lasts into adolescence and adulthood. And even if the blood levels decrease over time, the effects still last into adulthood. And so some of the things that they can have is lower intelligence quotient, or IQ. So they're not able to perform well in school. They're not able to associate with others as well. The other thing is, especially those who are of lower socioeconomic status and who live in an impoverished building or not the best conditions, studies have shown that some of them tend to have, on average, a difficult time learning new things. And so this adds on to the issues that people who are let's just say it, poor face. And I guess this is one of the reasons why you have such a push from the social sciences to help those who are in need, as one of the social tenets of public health. The other thing is acute encephalopathy. So this happens immediately. It's a short-term thing when blood levels of lead increase to about 100 micrograms per deciliter to 150 micrograms per deciliter. And so children, they tend to have vomiting, altered, or going in and out the level of consciousness, fluctuating consciousness. They can't walk properly, or they start to have seizures, or they can even go into a coma. So lead is something that's problematic for children. And because they're ingested lead, if they did ingest lead, they have problems very systemically throughout the entire body. Lead, if you look on the periodic table, lead is a heavy metal, and it tends to compete with other binding sites in the body with other ions, and so it can easily pass through the gastrointestinal system. So if it's a child who eats paint chips or anything else that contains lead, it can spread systemically throughout their entire body. But it can also affect adults as well. Now adults, they can be exposed from various means. One of them could be gasoline from back by, I believe, the 1960s, or it was the 1980s when they switched over to lead free, because lead was being introduced as a pollutant in the air. And so you can absorb lead through breathing as well. The other thing was paint. So those who were working in the painting industry could be affected as well. It used to be used in cosmetics. Moonshine is something. If you were legally making moonshine, you weren't using the best alloys. And so you can get lead poisoning from moonshine as well. Certain herbal remedies and supplements that you get from India. They also contain large amounts of lead if you get it from less than reputable sources. Certain cookwares also used to have lead in them as well. And so adults throughout the years have been exposed to lead, even as children. And so lead is stored in the bones. So children who are affected with lead poisoning, lead is stored within their growth plates. If you take an x-ray, you can see like the brightness of the lead that lights up. And so this article from NBC is pointing out that lead could be released from the bones from either having certain illnesses such as pregnancy or thyroid. It can increase blood pressure. And so they were able to prove in rats that chronic lead exposure can increase blood pressure and increase myocardial contractility in rats. And so what they were able to do was have two separate groups, one control group that was not exposed but treated similarly to the lead exposed rats. And they were able to find that after about a week, once the lead began to build up inside the rats, they noticed that the systolic blood pressure increased by 10 millimeters per mercury. And they also noticed that the left ventricle, the main pumping chamber of your heart, also increased its blood pressure. So in rats, the control level was 104, and in the lead exposed was 120, with the smaller confidence interval. And so this kind of shows, from an experimental standpoint, that lead exposures can increase your blood pressure. And so let's say you're a person who's in your 50s or 60s and you can't quite control your blood pressure despite the fact that you have multiple medications. Let's say you're in 3-4 different pills, and then they want to run like a few tests on you, do an ultrasound. One thing you might want to consider is whether or not you had a substantial amount of lead exposure in the past. So it seems as though some people can have an increase in blood pressure because of lead exposure. But there's also other things you have to look into. The other reasons why you may have increased blood pressure. And so decreasing your lead levels may not completely solve all your problems. There's also the obesity factor, how like if you decrease your weight, I would say about 10% of your weight, body weight, you can reduce the amount of medications you take greatly. That's just like a rule of thumb that I've been told and taught and seen as well. And so if you lose weight, if you exercise more, stop smoking, there's all these different factors that go into whether or not you lose weight, or lose weight and also lose your medications. So that's high blood pressure is not a one factor only. There's multiple factors. Sometimes you can have a rare condition where you have renal artery stenosis, where you have decreased blood supply to your kidneys, and so your kidneys pump up a hormone. Check out my earlier podcast to learn about that. And so they increase this hormone and thus increases your blood pressure, which is why ACE inhibitors work. So they're talking about how lead, even today, you can have lead in your drinking water. Even today in 2018, Flint still doesn't have drinking water. So the next would be a PSA, I would say. Crowdfunding sites funnel millions to bogus treatments. This is also from NBC. This goes into all the gullible people out there who want to donate money and think it's going to a great cause. It might be better just to go to your hospital and ask who needs the money, because you can quite easily scam a bunch of people out of money. The next bit of news is from CNN. take it as you will. It's an article titled, "You Can Cut Your Cancer Risk by Eating Organic," new study says. And so this article quotes a study from JAMA where it was recently published stating that you can ward off non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and postmenopausal breast cancer by eating organic food. Now, this is warding off, as in you can help prevent getting it, but it's not treating. So if you're out there and you have cancer, you want to eat organic to treat your cancer, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you want to, best of luck. But I wouldn't recommend it. So this article states that the authors calculated the risk, and they were almost a nice number of 25% less likely to develop cancer. And they were 73% less likely to develop non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and 21% less likely to develop postmenopausal breast cancer. Now, cancer is, again, like I said with high blood pressure, it's another thing that's multifactorial. A common theory is that two hypothesis. One is that you have a insult on top of a genetic disposition to developing that cancer. And so this doesn't quite equate for it because it costs a lot of money to do a genetic analysis on every single patient that you have in your study. And so there's a study. So this study goes into how eating organic can ward off cancer. Now, a little bit about this study. It was done in France with about close to 7,000 or 70,000 French adults. More than 3/4 of them were women and in their mid-40s. And so the volunteers were categorized into 4 groups, and each person reported eating 16 organic products, including fruits, vegetables, meats, fish, MREs, and many other, including diet supplements. So you had a group of people who were essentially surveyed. It doesn't really have an exact experimental. Again, if you listen to an earlier podcast, I go into why experimental is better than an epidemiological survey. And so, since this was a survey, you can't really conclude anything at all. All it just means is that you need more research. And so, a little bit more about this. They did a follow-up with the volunteers and found out that out of the whatever remaining they had, they start off with 68,946 French adults, and only 1,340 developed cancers, or unfortunately developed cancers. And the most prevalent was breast cancer, followed by prostate cancer, which makes sense. 2 of very common cancers: skin cancer, colorectal cancer, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is, compared to prostate cancer, not that common. And so, again, this is a epidemiological study. You can't really bring into any sort of conclusion or anything like that, hard conclusion. And so this headline that they have is really misleading. And it's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, was because you have all these clickbait titles. Maybe you saw the clickbait title on this podcast. But I really just wanted to dive in and help clear the air with some of these articles, because it could lead people to the incorrect conclusions. And so maybe organic foods can cause cancer or prevent cancer. It does pose that risk, though, or that question of how they genetically modify your foods. So one concern is that with non-organic foods, foods that are not USDA approved. They are genetically modified so that they yield a better crop, and they know as compounds that were inherent to the structure of these or non-organic fruits and vegetables that were harmful to bees. Now, humans are not bees, unless you identify as a bee. That's a different story. But humans are not bees. And so you can't really draw the same conclusion as to whether or not it is beneficial to humans or a hindrance to humans. And so I would say that while organic seems as a lofty goal that we want to have, it's not feasible, granted the amount of population. So give genetically modified foods a chance, I guess. That's probably the closing thing. Give genetically modified foods a chance. I hope you enjoy. I started a Facebook page. If you have any questions or want to tell me my voice sucks, you can tell me there. Follow me on iTunes. Thank you for listening. And this was Apple with the Doctor. Eat a genetically modified apple. Good day.